I welcome you all to the module 9. So, module 9 is on social behavior and this is lecture number 23, attitudes and persuasion. So, this is the second lecture of this module and overall it is lecture number 23. So, before we talk about today's lecture, let me give you a brief recap of the last lecture. So, the last lecture, that is lecture number 22, was also part of the same module where we discussed some of the basic ideas around the concept of social psychology, and we elaborately discussed on the concept of social perception. And within the social perception, we specifically discussed the concept of impression formation and attribution and the various theories associated with it. In today's lecture, we will be focusing on the concept of attitude and how it influences behavior and some of the theories related to attitude change. So, that is one part of the lecture that we will talk about. Another aspect of today's lecture will focus on the concept of persuasion and some of the theoretical concepts around the persuasion, and at the end we will talk about some possible applications of the theories of persuasion in the real world. So, let us start today's lecture. So, the concept of attitude is one of the central ideas within the social psychology, and it plays very central role in understanding our social behavior. So, in social psychology, the attitudes and behavior basically talks about the relationship between what people think and feel about something and how they act towards it. So, attitude is about how do you think and evaluate something. Obviously, it is also feeling associated with it, that we will talk about. Now, one part of our behavior is obviously how you think, evaluate social world or the various stimulus that we are exposed to. And another part is whether that thinking part influences your behavior or does it get translated into behavior or not. So, that is the behavioral or the action part. So, what is the relationship between these two aspects plays very important role in our understanding of social behavior. So, although attitudes often guide behavior, a lot of time whatever behavior or action that we do is directly connected to the kind of attitude that we have. So, whatever we think, generally it can get translated into actions, but it is not always, that may not be true in real world context. So, this relationship is not always perfectly consistent. It is not all the time whatever attitude you have, whatever thinking process you have will get translated into action. That is not necessarily true. For example, while it seems logical that a positive attitude towards exercise would lead to hitting the gym, the reality may be different. So, many people may have pro exercise kind of attitude, but they may not actually do exercise. So, there is a gap. So, we will look into all these aspects. There is very complex relationship between attitude and behavior. Before we talk about this relationship, it is important also to understand whatever the context that we discussed. This context is very well established by some of the classic studies in social psychology. For example, Lapierre's 1934 study on discrimination, that it is one of the classic study, one of the initial studies that showed that how there can be discrepancy between what attitude we have and what behavior, whether that gets translated into behavior or not. So, that was a very classic study. It was done by Richard Lapierre in 1934. It demonstrated that people's attitude do not always match their actual behavior, not necessarily all the time. So, what was the study? The Lapierre wanted to examine whether prejudiced attitude towards a minority group would translate into discriminatory behavior. So, that was, he was trying to look that when people have certain prejudice in their thought processes about a minority group, does that thought processes translate into action or not. So, what he did, he traveled across the United States with a Chinese couple at a time when anti-Chinese prejudice was common. So, that was a time when Chinese people were kind of there was a lot of prejudice against them. People did not like them too much, and there was a lot of prejudice and discrimination against them. So, in that environment, Lapierre traveled across United States with a Chinese couple, and he was trying to look when people have a prejudiced attitude about Chinese people, whether that get actually translated into action or not. So, they visited over 250 hotels and restaurants with that Chinese couple. Lapierre observed how the establishment treated the couple. So, because there was an anti-Chinese attitude in that time, at that time, so So, he was trying to see whether that attitude is actually translated into action by visiting different restaurants, and he was looking at how they treat those couples. What he found, that couple actually was served in almost all places. Only one establishment refused the service. So, this suggested that actual behavior towards the couple was mostly non-discriminatory. Even though there was a discriminatory attitudes in the collective level, that discriminative attitude was not actually getting translated into action in most of the cases, at least whatever places he visited or restaurant he visited. He did a follow-up survey 6 months later. After that visit of the restaurants, Lapierre sent letters to the same establishment wherever he visited all the restaurants. Will you accept members of the Chinese race as your guest in your restaurant? So, that he was trying to now measure the attitudes. So, that was the thing. What he found, about more than 90% responded that they would not serve Chinese customers. So, there is a clear discrepancy. When actually they visited Chinese couple, they served, but when they were asked whether they will serve them, majority of them said no. So, this clearly showed that whatever attitude or mental thought, evaluative thought processes that we have may not always consistently predict our behavior. So, that was one of the initial experiment that clearly established that inconsistency. So, what was the conclusion? So, there was a clear discrepancy between the attitude and behavior. Attitude, when they are asked, they said they will not serve Chinese people, but in actually when they visited, they were served. Now, so we discussed the possible that there can be complex relationship in the attitude and behavior. We will look into that part more detail, but before that let us talk about the concept of attitude in terms of actually what are the components and what are the things involved when we use the word attitude. What does that mean? So, attitudes are positive or negative evaluations of objects of thought, that is how favorably or unfavorably we feel about something. So, in general when we say attitude, what is your attitude towards x, y, z? So, that means we are asking whether what is your evaluation? Do you evaluate it positively? Do you evaluate it negatively, and so on? You think favorably about it, you think unfavorably about it, and so on. What is your feeling associated, what are the thought processes associated with something? So, there is an evaluative component when we talk about attitudes. Now, when we talk about attitudes, what could be the object of that thought? It may include anything. So, people may have attitude about social issues. For example, one may have attitude or lot of evaluations about climate change, online privacy, whatever it is. It can be various social issues. It can be about certain social groups, such as teenagers, teachers. People may have certain evaluations about them. It may be about certain institutions such as schools, healthcare system. It can be about certain products, about for example, smartphones, electric cars. It could be about certain individuals such as a teacher or a co-worker or a public leader. We have attitudes about almost everything. So, in short, an attitude reflects how we think and feel about people, ideas or objects in our environment. How we think, how we feel, and obviously that may also get translated into actions in certain cases. So, the object could be anything like social issues, social groups, institution, persons, situations, and so on. So, there are three components in the attitude. When we use the term attitude, there are three things involved in it. One is obviously the cognitive component. What is your beliefs? What are your thought processes? How do you think about something? So, that's pure thought aspect is called cognitive component. The thoughts or beliefs a person has about attitudes. Example, believing that regular exercise improves health. So, you believe that exercising improves your health at the thought level. Now, at this stage you have not gone into actually doing exercise or something, but you may have certain beliefs based on whatever you heard about or whatever you read, whatever somebody told you, and so on. You may create certain thought processes or belief system around some concepts, some ideas, some situations, some persons, etc. So, that is the cognitive part of it. Attitude also has an affective or emotional parts to it. What does that mean is that emotions or feelings towards the object. Whenever we have certain thought processes about an object or a situation, obviously with thoughts emotion also follows. For example, feeling happy or energized when thinking about exercise. So, let us say you like doing exercises. The moment you think about exercise, maybe you feel good about, you may feel happy. So, if you have positive evaluation, most probably you will have a positive emotions associated with. If you have negative evaluations about something, you will have negative emotions towards it. So, emotion is connected to thought processes. So, attitude will also have an emotional component to it. And the third component is the behavioral or the action component or the action tendencies. Whatever thought processes you have, whatever emotions you have, it will create certain tendencies to behave in a certain ways. Whether you actually do it or not, that is a different question, but it will create certain tendencies. So, behavioral tendencies means action tendencies. So, the tendency to behave in a certain way towards the object. For example, going for walk or joining a gym regularly when you have, let us say, positive attitude towards exercise. You may actually go to the gym and do exercise. Okay, so, that is the behavioral component to it. Now, as we already seen, it is not necessarily the cognitive and the affective component will always get translated into actions. That is not necessary, but it can create certain action tendencies. So, attitude may have all the three components: thought parts or belief part, emotional part and the action part. So, in short, we can say attitude involves what we think, how we feel and how we are likely to act towards something. That is decided by the attitude. What kind of attitude do you have towards something? So, it has thinking part, feeling part and the action part also. Now, the question arises, as we have seen in the beginning, that attitude may not always consistently predict behavior. That if you have certain attitudes, not necessarily your action will follow accordingly. We have seen in the initial few slides. Now, then the question arises, when and why do attitude influence behavior? Under what circumstances attitude predicts behavior and under what circumstances they do not predict. So, let us look into some of the some mediating or moderating factor that can influence attitude and behavior. It is not necessarily every attitude will translate into behavior. So, there are some factors in between the attitude and behavior which will influence this relationship. So, let us look into this, some of the possible factors which actually decides whether attitude will lead to behavior or not. First important is the strong attitudes. So, a strong attitude is held with great certainty and emotional intensity, and strong attitudes were more likely to guide decisions and actions. So, if you have certain very strong attitude towards something, then it is more likely to get translated into actions, because strong attitude has a very strong thinking part and a very strong emotions associated with it. Then people are more likely to act also accordingly. For example, a person who strongly believes in the environmental protection is more likely to avoid plastic bags and recycle regularly and so on. Because the person believes very strongly that we should protect our environment, then it is more likely that the persons will also behave accordingly, because the belief is very strong. Emotions are also very strong associated with the environmental protection. So, the person is more likely to do pro-environmental behavior such as avoiding plastics and recycling and so on. However, if somebody has a very weak attitude towards environmental protection, he or she may not actually do things for environmental protection. It may be very weakly somewhere in their mind. So, if a attitude is very strong, it is more likely to predict behavior. So, that is one factor. Second is stable attitudes. Attitudes which are very stable are those attitudes which are consistent over time. So, if certain attitudes you have which remains consistent, like some attitudes we keep changing all the time. Today you may have certain positive attitude towards a person, after 1 week it may change and so on. So, that means it is not very stable, it is changing on a regular basis. If it is a stable attitude, that means it is for a very long time you have been consistently believing something in the same direction. So, that is the stable attitudes. So, attitudes that change frequently are less reliable and they cannot predict behavior, because you yourself is not very sure about it. Your attitudes keeps changing. So, it will not translate into behavior. So, if someone has, for example, consistently supported vegetarianism for many years, they are more likely to continue avoiding meat, because the person has this a very stable attitudes. I have to be a vegetarian. they are not changing it, like after 1 month they will become non-vegetarian or not, like that. So, it is a very consistent stable attitude, then the person is more likely to continue and avoid non-vegetarian food and so on. So, that is a very stable attitude. The third factor which will decide is directly relevant to the behavior, means whether the attitudes are very specific. Specific attitudes predict behavior more than the general attitudes. For example, so if you see, attitudes predict behavior best when they are specifically related to the behavior. If they are very specifically related, very specific things you believe in something, rather than some general ideas. General ideas do not translate into actions. For example, a general attitude like I value health may not strongly predict behavior. So, let us say this is an attitude, I value health, health is important. It is very general, but in what sense, what are you doing about it? But you believe health is good. So, everybody believe health is a, I value health and everybody wants to be healthy, but not everybody actually does specific things for promoting health and so on. So, it is a very general attitude, it may actually not get translated into actions, but a specific attitude like I believe jogging every morning is important. So, this is very specific, jogging there in the morning, it is very specific. So, if you believe something like this very specific, then you are more likely to actually regularly go and jog, rather than I want to be healthy as a general concept, but I believe every day we should jog in the morning. It is very specific, then it is more likely to translate into actions. So, that specific attitudes are more stronger or stronger predictor of behavior. Then important attitudes, obviously, so that is also very important, to what extent you assign importance to the attitude. So, that is very important. So, attitudes that are personally very important or connected to one's values or identity have a very strong influence on behavior. Yeah. So, if something is very important for you personally, obviously, it will translate into actions. If someone believes that education is extremely important, they are more likely to study regularly and attend classes consistently, because education is personally important to me. So, I will obviously spend time on education and getting good results and so on, because it is important. So, personally if it is important, it is more likely to get translated into actions. The fifth factor which decides whether attitude predicts behavior or not is to what extent it is accessible in your memory. Are you able to remember your attitudes very frequently? Then it will translate. If you are not even able to remember what attitude you have, it will not translate into actions. For example, so an attitude that can be quickly recalled from memory is more likely to guide your behavior, because you remember everything. If you do not remember things associated with that attitude, obviously it will not guide your behavior. For example, if a person recently had a bad experience with a particular brand of phone, that negative attitude will quickly come into mind when choosing a new phone. Now, recently you had a bad experience with certain brand of phones, now it is very fresh in your mind. The next time when you go for buying another phone, probably you will avoid that, because it is fresh in your mind, the negative experiences that you had. Maybe after a few years you may not even remember it, but now it is fresh in your mind, it is accessible, it will influence your decision making process. So, that is accessibility of memory also plays important role. So, that is one thing. So, attitude can influence behavior, but obviously under certain circumstances, conditions, when certain conditions are present, that relationship becomes stronger. So, it is not always like attitude predicts behavior, it depends on certain factors which we have discussed. Now, social psychologists also found the relationship can be other way around also. What does that mean? Is that attitude can influence behavior, that we have seen. Now, the other way around or the opposite can be also true. For example, behavior can affect your attitude. Now, you have done something, then from that action you can start creating certain belief system or certain evaluations, that I am doing something, that means I have this attitude. So, from behavior you can also derive attitude. So, that is also possible. So, that is, let us look into that aspects now. Sometimes behavior influence attitudes rather than attitude influencing behavior. So, opposite relationship is also possible. In such cases, people change their attitudes to match what they have done. This happens because individuals generally prefer consistency between their actions and beliefs. So, sometimes people change their attitude because they have done something, just to make it consistent. So, if you believe something and if you do something else, so it creates an inconsistency or discrepancy in your mind which is uncomfortable. So, sometimes whenever you do something, you also start thinking in line with that actions. So, in that way actions can influence your attitudes. So, we will try to understand these parts. So, certain theories explain this aspect very beautifully in and two such theories are very important in this context. One is cognitive dissonance theory, which is one of the most popular and celebrated theory in social psychology. Another is self perception theory. Now, let us look into these theories, two theories, to understand this relationship between attitude and behavior and whether behavior can predict attitude and so on. So, cognitive dissonance theory, let us look into what is the meaning of this. So, this theory was proposed by Leon Festinger in 1957. So, this basically refers, cognitive dissonance refers to the psychological or the mental discomfort we experience when we hold two or more contradictory beliefs, ideas, values, or when our behavior clashes with our beliefs. Cognitive dissonance means there is some kind of discrepancy in your mind, that two things are not in line. So, it creates problem, certain uncomfort or discomfort in your mind. So, that is the meaning of cognitive dissonance, and typically happens when our attitudes and behaviors are inconsistent. You believe something, but you are doing something else. It may create dissonance in your mind which is uncomfortable, and people do lot of things to reduce the dissonance because it is uncomfortable. So, we will look into that how they reduce it later. So, most important dissonance is generally created by when there is a discrepancy between your attitude and behavior. So, this discrepancy can be also between two thoughts, two value system and so on. But most important or the cognitive dissonance that is most remarkable in human mind is between attitudes and behaviors. So, if there is a discrepancy, it creates dissonance. Dissonance means certain is a kind of discomfort or kind of unstable mental state, and you want to reduce it. So, that is the whole purpose. So, let us look into this more. So, one of the classic experiment that was done in this context, which was supporting this cognitive dissonance theory, is that it was one famous experiment that was done by Festinger and his colleague James Carl Smith in 1959. So, what was the task given to the participant? So, this is the experimental design. Participants performed a boring task. So, participants were given very boring task, like putting one thing on top of another thing and then again removing one from top to again the same place. Very monotonous, boring, and anybody can, there may not be any exception probably that everybody will think it is extremely boring task. So, some such kind of tasks were given to them. So, there were two groups in terms of how they manipulated their mental thought processes. One group of participants were paid $1, another group of participants were paid $20. Why they were given? Just to tell another person that the task was interesting. So, basically they were asked to lie. So, it was not said it is a boring task, but everybody will feel such a task is very boring. Now, one group of participants were given $1 and they were asked to go and tell another person who probably was waiting outside to come again and do the same task, that the task was very interesting. So, one group was given $1, another group was given $20 to just go and kind of lie to that person and say that the task that they have done is very interesting. Okay. So, only difference was in terms of incentive given for lying. What they found, the result was the participants who were paid $1 actually later reported they liked the task. That was kind of very counterintuitive in that sense. Those who were paid $1, they actually, when later asked to rate the task, whether they are interesting, the task was to what extent was interesting, actually they rated it higher in terms of it, they reported they found it more interesting. Now, how do you explain this? Now, this is as compared to the $20 group of participants. So, those who paid only $1 had insufficient justification for lying. So, they changed their attitude to reduce the dissonance. Now, it was very difficult for them to justify for $1 to lie and tell someone certain false information. So, it created dissonance in their mind. How can I say something wrong, which probably they thought is not interesting, and telling another person that it is interesting, and that is just for $1. So, they found that it could not find the justification for this lying. So, they actually started thinking probably I actually liked it. So, they changed their attitude, because it is very creating discomfort in their mind. To say a task which is boring as an interesting to someone just for $1. So, it created dissonance in their mind. So, to reduce the dissonance, they actually later said actually we found the task interesting. So, now there is no dissonance, because I found it interesting. So, I said it interesting. So, there is no dissonance. But for other $20 participant, they had justification. So, I lied because I was paid a good amount of money. So, they could find justification. So, that was the one possible explanation that could explain this cognitive dissonance, whole concept of cognitive dissonance. Now, the researcher found that whenever there is a cognitive dissonance in our mind, we try to reduce it. Just the participant in this experiment, they tried to reduce it by actually thinking that actually I liked it. So, what happens when we experience cognitive dissonance? What are the processes or the methods by which we reduce the dissonance? Because we want to reduce it, because it is uncomfortable. So, researchers generally say there are 3 methods for reducing cognitive dissonance that people generally use in their day to day life. One is called direct strategies, which involves actually changing our attitudes or behavior. So, there is a discrepancy between, so you have an attitude and there is a behavior. Okay. Now, so here there is some kind of discrepancy here, it's not aligned, So, there is some kind of discrepancy. Attitude is something and behavior is something else. So, there is no alignment here. So, it creates what? It creates dissonance. So, there is no alignment between what you believe and what you are actually doing. So, then what happens when we try to reduce it, because it is uncomfortable. So, there is in the direct strategies, there are 2 options, either you change this or change this, either way it will work. So, this is for example here. So, in direct strategies, either you change your attitude or you change your behavior. So, in that way then inconsistency will be reduced, because you are changing one of these things. So, equation fits now. So, for example, a person believes that smoking is harmful, okay, and he smokes, let us say. So, this creates a dissonance. He believes smoking is harmful, that is in his mind, but he is also smoking. So, there is a discrepancy. Attitude is that it is harmful, but I am actually doing that is harmful. So, there is a discrepancy, it creates dissonance. So, in direct strategies, how do you reduce that? So, either you change this attitude or you change the behavior. So, one way is just to quit smoking. So, you believe it is harmful, so you do not get into this behavior. So, there is no dissonance, or you simply stop believing that it is harmful and you keep smoking, then also it reduces. So, the idea is either by changing attitude or behavior, in both ways people try to reduce the dissonance. This is one way, this is called direct strategy. Second is by, so as we said, the another way is, one way is to change behavior, another is change attitudes. So, you can change the attitude that smoking is not that dangerous. Many people smoke and they leave, it is not that dangerous. Something you find some kind of, you change that attitude that it is harmful or something like that. Second strategy is trivializing or minimizing the conflict. So, you just reduce the importance of this conflict. That is also another way to reduce dissonance. So, let us look into how it is done. So, it is another way is to you just downplay the importance of the inconsistency, making it seem like it is not that important, it is insignificant. For example, a person who rarely recycles, but believes environmental protection is important. might say recycling one bottle does not really make any difference. Okay. So, there is a dissonance here. So, environment is important, but he is not doing any recycling behavior. So, there is a dissonance in his attitude and in his behavior. So, he can reduce the dissonance. One way he will trivialize it or minimize this importance, say just recycling one bottle does not make any difference anyway. So, I can keep, so whatever I have done is not that important. So, he is minimizing the importance, so that will also reduce the dissonance. Another example, a student who procrastinates might think missing one assignment is not that a big deal. Now, he is, so there is an assignment he need to do, it is important, but he is not doing it. So, there is a dissonance, he is procrastinating and delaying it. So, he can reduce this dissonance by trivializing it, by saying it is not such a big deal if I just miss one assignment. So, that is trivializing. So, you just treat the conflict as unimportant. So, that is also another way people reduce the dissonance. The third way is you add another factor or another cognition or another thought processes which will reduce the dissonance. How that is done? Let us see. So, we find some new information which will outweigh whatever dissonance belief you have, something more important than what some more important thought or belief you introduce that will make the dissonant thought less important. So, here we are not necessarily denying the original conflict. So, there is a conflict, the person is not denying, but instead they introduce a third factor which will recontextualize this whole situation, making the inconsistency feel less significant. So, they will introduce another factor, so that this whole dissonance looks okay, or I can be in this situation. For example, so there is a conflict, you value being a present active parent, but you are consistently working 60 hours a week and you are not able to give time to your children. So, it creates a dissonance. I am not able to do the role of my parenting adequately, because I am not able to give time to my children. So, this it creates conflicts, and a lot of parents may have certain discomfort or emotional discomfort in such situations, because they are not able to give time. So, this creates a cognitive dissonance. Now, lot of parents can reduce the dissonance by adding another new cognition or thought. What is that? Now, they can say, by working these extra hours now, I am securing a college fund that will give my children a better future than I had. So, you are adding a new factor, that saying I am doing this extra work, although I am not able to give time now, but whatever I am doing is for my children only. So, it will secure their future. So, whatever dissonance you have, it will look less important. So, it will reduce the dissonance. Okay. So, this new thought about long term security outweighs the immediate guilt of missing dinner or missing or not able to spend time with the children and so on. So, like this also people many times reduce their dissonance. So, these are the three ways by which people reduce their dissonance. So, there is a direct way where you either change your thoughts or actions. So, second way is you just trivialize it, you say that is not that important. Third way, you add something more valuable thought processes which will reduce, because of that thought processes the dissonance will look less important, because something more important came up. So, that is adding new cognitions. So, this is how people reduce the dissonance. So, this is called cognitive dissonance theory, that explains this complex relationship between attitude and behavior, and what happens when there is a discrepancy, the dissonance when it is created, how do we reduce that. There is another theory that is called as a self perception theory. It was introduced by Daryl Bam in 1972. The theory explains how people sometimes develop or infer their attitudes by observing their own behavior. So, as we said, sometimes behavior can change your attitudes. Sometimes, many times attitude can influence your behavior, many times behavior can influence your attitude. So, this theory actually talks about how behavior can influence your attitude. especially when attitudes are very weak, unclear or not well formed. In that case, many times you whatever action you do, from that you derive your attitude. So, according to this theory, self perception theory, people often understand their own attitude in the same way as they understand other people's attitude, by observing behavior in the situation in which it occurs. How do we find somebody has a positive attitude towards exercise or not? We see their behavior, that person whether he has a positive attitude towards exercise, because I see that person is doing exercise every day. So, I believe that person has a positive attitude. So, by observing others, we understand what is that person's attitude towards something. Similarly, many times we observe ourselves doing some action and then say, I am doing this, I must have this attitude. So, from behavior you are deriving your attitude. So, that is also happens in many situations. In simple term, I did this behavior, so I must have this attitude. So, instead of attitude always causing behavior, the theory suggests that behavior can also shape attitude. Other way around is also possible. So, how does that happen? What are the basic processes involved in it? It works in generally 3 steps. People observe their own behavior, they consider the context of the situation in which behavior happens, and then they say infer attitude based on the observation. So, they create their own attitude. For example, helping behavior. Suppose a person volunteers regularly at a community center, volunteers for some helping behavior for other people, let us say for disadvantaged people, poor people, they do all the time some community work. Let us say a person is like this, he is doing lot of voluntary work. After observing this behavior, the person may think, after doing some of these actions, the person himself or herself may think, I spend a lot of time helping others, I must really care about social service, or I may be a very helping person, because I am doing it all the time. So, you see your behavior and then you judge what attitude I have. So, that is also possible. So, here attitude develops from observing one's own behavior. When you do not have a very clear cut thought processes or attitudes towards something, generally when we do some actions, from that action I say I must have this attitude because I am doing this. So, that is also possible. Now, just like cognitive dissonance, there are certain conditions. So, self perception theory applies most. So, this from behavior attitude is derived in certain condition, this is more relevant in certain conditions. It is most likely when this behavior will influence your attitude, most likely when attitudes are weak and unclear. You do not have very clear cut idea about what is your attitude towards something, let us say helping poor people or something like that. So, let us say you do not have very clear attitude about it, but you start doing helping people 1 time, 2 times, then you start believing, okay, I am doing this, I must have helping nature or something like that. So, people have little pure experience with the object. If they do not have much experience, they do not know about it. So, then they do the action and then attitude is created out of it. The behavior occurs without strong external pressure or reward, because then you cannot justify, Many times you do something because there is a reward involved in it. Then you say I did it because there was a reward, but when there is less reward you cannot justify it. So, you say I must be, let us say you are helping someone simply because there is a reward. If you do this, you will get some reward. Then you are doing it for reward. You can justify, okay, I am doing this because of some reward. It is not because I am helping person. But let us say there is no reward and still you are helping another person or other person very regularly. Then now you cannot justify your reward, because then I must be doing it because I am like this person or I have this attitude. That is what is clearly explained in the cognitive dissonance experiment. Why $1 participant found this task interesting? Because they could not justify $1 for lying. So, they said I must be liking it. So, that is the thing. So, many times when behavior occurs without strong external pressure or reward, then from behavior people derive their attitude. So, in such situation people look their behavior and understand what is their preferences and so on. So, that is about attitude, components of attitudes and the relationship between attitude behavior. These are some of the things. Now, let us look into another concept related to attitude, is how attitude change happens when there is a directly somebody is trying to change your attitudes. So, that is called persuasion. People persuade you, please buy my product. So, they are trying to change your attitude consciously. So, that is called persuasion. So, that is there is a conscious intervention to change someone's attitude. So, let us look into this whole concept of persuasion. Now, this persuasion refers to the process of influencing or changing person attitudes, beliefs, intentions, behaviors through communication. So, through communication you try to change someone's thoughts, beliefs, attitudes or intentions to do something by communicating, by saying something, then it is called persuasion. So, you are trying to change attitude of another person by consciously communicating with the other person. So, in social psychology, persuasion involves deliberate attempts. So, this is a conscious attempt to shape attitudes by presenting arguments, messages or cues. So, you try to argue why you should do something, why you should not do something. So, you are doing lot of arguments trying to change people's mind. These are called persuasion. For example, a public health campaign encouraging vaccination attempts to persuade people to adopt positive attitude towards vaccines. So, a lot of this advertisement, what they are doing, they are only pursuing people, buy my product, do this. Why you want to do? Because there is a positive things associated with it and so on. So, all the advertisement are actually persuasion only. They are trying to change people's attitude towards the product positively, so that people will buy it. So, that is called persuasion. So, persuasion is widely used in varieties of things in our social world, in advertising, in politics, in education, marketing, health communication, everywhere people are trying to change others' mind deliberately through communication. So, that is called persuasion. So, some of the theories that tries to explain how persuasion happens, under what conditions and so on, we will look into few theories. One theory is called Yale attitude change model or Yale model of persuasion. Okay. What does this theory talks about persuasion? So, Yale attitude change model is one of the earliest and most influential theories which explains how persuasion actually leads to attitude change. How people or under what conditions people change their attitudes through communication. It was developed in 1950s by researcher Carl Hovland of Yale University. So, that is why it is called as an Yale attitude change model, because it was developed in the Yale University. Now, the central question in this theory is who says what, to whom and with what effect. Attitude change depends on all these factors. Who is saying, who is communicating and what he is saying, what is his message and who is the audience, to whom and what is the effect of that. All these factors actually decides whether attitude change will happen or not. So, it highlights various components of persuasion. So, these are the four components that this theory talks about. One is source, who is the communicator, who is trying to change the other person, what is his characteristics. So, that is communicator will play important role whether the attitude change will happen or not. Lot of characteristics of the source will determine that. Then message, content, is content good enough to change attitude? What are the characteristics of the content? Under what kind of conditions, which content will influence or change attitudes? The characteristics of message or content is also important. The third factor is channel. What is the medium of communication? How are you communicating? Is it face to face? Is it through some media or is it indirect? Whatever it is, that will also influence. And the fourth factor is audience. Who is the receiver? What is his or her characteristics? That also decides whether attitude change happens or not. So, let us briefly look into each of these. Source factor, what is the characteristics of the communicator? Plays very important role whether attitude change will happen or not for the audience. Source of the message plays very important role in the attitude change. Some of the characteristics of the source determines effectiveness of attitude change. One is source credibility. So, credibility refers to how expert and trustworthy the communicator is. Do people trust the person who is communicating? Is he or she is expert, trustworthy? Then obviously, if someone who is trustworthy, who is expert, if that person says something, then people are likely willing to listen and change their attitude. So, in the credibility there are two important: expertise, whether the communicator knowledge or is the person competent to talk about the topic. So, that is expertise. Trustworthy means whether the communicator is honest or not. Many times somebody may be expert, then the person believes that person is not honest. So, they may not even then also believe, or people will not listen to that person, because they believe even though the person may be expert, but the person is lying. So, trust issue is there. Then also attitude change will not happen. For example, health advice from a medical doctor is more persuasive than advice from a general person. So, if a doctor says something about health, or you do something, do that, do not do that, then we are more likely to listen, because we believe the person is expert. And obviously, if you trust that person, then the person's message will have a much more impact. So, to what extent the source is credible plays very important role whether the persuasion will happen or not. So, this is one important factor in terms of characteristics of the source. So, whether the source is credible or not. Second is attractiveness of the source. So, we are talking about source only now. If the source is credible, obviously, they are more likely to have an impact or have more persuasive influence on other people. If the source is attractive also, then also it has more impact. People are often more influenced by communicators who are physically attractive, charismatic, or similar to them. Some things that makes them more attractive, okay? Maybe similarity with yourself, or some physically attractive, somebody becomes attractive because of success and so on. So, one person can become attractive for varieties of reasons. The idea is, if you believe that person is attractive, then obviously you are more likely to listen to that person. So, this is why a lot of these advertisements are endorsed by celebrities, because people are attracted to them. Film stars, heroes, heroines, sports stars. Why a lot of this product or companies approach these people and pay huge amount of money to endorse their products? Because they are attractive. People listen to them, people want to hear them. So, whenever they say something, they will listen to that. So, that attractiveness also influences. Now, third factor within the source is similarity to the audience. Messages delivered by people who are similar background, values, or experiences are often persuasive. If people are very similar background or experiences, then we feel a sense of connection. This person is just like me. So, whatever he is saying, probably you are more likely to listen to that person. For example, students may respond more positively to advice from senior students than from, let us say, some distant authorities, because they feel more connection and affinity towards the student community and so on. So, in certain cases this may be also true. So, these were the factors in the communicator. Whoever is communicating, certain factors will influence, credibility, attractiveness, sense of similarity with the audience, all these things will influence. Second is the message factors. Obviously, somebody is communicator and then he has a message. What is the characteristics of that message? What is the content of that communication is also important. So, message could be one sided or maybe two sided. Based on that, the impact will also determine. One sided messages presents only arguments supporting the persuader's point, work best when audience are already agrees on something. One sided message. So, if you like something, you say this is good and you have to do this and so on. It works only when audience also are of the similar kind. They also already like that product. So, if you just add on to that, it will emphasize that, then it becomes fine. For example, a fitness campaign highlighting only the benefits of exercise. If you do exercise, everything is good and so on, and people, if they like exercising, obviously it will have an impact. Now, let us say two-sided message, where it presents both supporting argument and opposing also. Both the sides they will present and they will say, then I think this side is better or something. So, they will like pros and cons and everything. Often this is more effective with educated and skeptical audience. If there are skeptical, educated, argumentative people, then two-sided message always works best to change their attitudes, because they will question, why not that part, what is the problem. If you are saying this is good, there is certain negative thing also. So, if your message has both the aspects, people who have more skepticism, they are more likely to believe you, because you are showing both the aspects. For example, A message acknowledging that exercise requires efforts, pain, but also it has long term health benefits. For example, so this is a two-sided message. So, depending on the audience, in certain cases one-sided message may work if the audience also kind of already agrees with certain things. Two-sided message works for different kind of audience, especially the educated and the skeptical people and so on. Certain messages with fear appeals may be more impactful in certain conditions. Messages which evokes fear, anxiety can motivate attitude change, because people will get more hooked to those messages, because there is a fear involved in it. For example, public safety campaigns showing consequences of drunk driving, show certain images of drunk driving consequences, accident and so on. It will evoke certain fear and people may change certain attitudes. However, fear appeals may not be effective everywhere. It is more effective when the threat is perceived as serious. Audience feels personally vulnerable, that I can be also in the same situation. The messages provides clear solutions. Then the fear appeal messages are more effective. Without solutions, fear may lead to denial or avoidance. If you do not give solutions, simply showing fear and so on, it may not be very effective. People may simply deny or avoid such kind of messages. Repetition of the message is also important. So, repeated exposure to the same message makes it more familiar and people tend to develop more positive attitude towards it. If you say one thing again and again and again, people start believing it. So, this idea is closely related to the mere exposure effect, which was described by Robert Zajonc, which suggests that simply seeing or hearing something repeatedly can make people like it more. And that is what advertiser does. Same product, they do not just advertise once in a month or something like that. Every day you will see the product is advertised everywhere again and again and again. So, people when they see it again and again, they start liking it, and whenever they see the same product somewhere in the shop, they will feel okay, I have seen many times, probably unconsciously they will start buying that. So, when people repeatedly see an advertisement for brand, they may begin to prefer that brand even without carefully evaluating its qualities. Simply that repeated exposure will influence their decisions. So, these are about the characteristics of the message. Now, medium of communication, when you try to persuade somebody, how are you communicating? What is the medium of that communication? So, communication channel refers to medium through which message is transmitted. For example, it could be face to face communication, it could be on the televisions, it could be on the radio, it could be on the newspaper, it could be on the social media. So, these are all medium that will also influence the effectiveness of the message. For example, research suggests face to face communication is more persuasive in the complex topics, allows emotional connection and feedback. When the topic is very complex, generally face to face communication is more effective and it leads to more emotional connection with the audience. You can explain them face to face, so that is much more effective. In certain cases, mass media communication can be important, effective for large audiences, because through mass media you can reach out to large audiences, lakhs of people. You cannot do it in face to face. So, often influencers awareness rather than deep attitude change, it influences awareness, but many times a lot of this mass media may not have a very deep influence on attitude change, which may be more possible in the face to face communication, but you can reach out to large number of people. For example, public health campaign uses televisions and social media to spread messages about vaccination to increase awareness and so on. So, that is more effective because you can reach out to large number of people. So, that is about the medium. Now, the last factor is the audience. What is the characteristics of the people who are listening to you? That is also important. One is, what is the intelligence level of the audience? More intelligent individuals are generally, they understand the argument better, but may also resist weak arguments. Therefore, strong arguments are needed to persuade highly intelligent audience. So, if the audience is very intelligent, educated, then it is not easy to change their attitudes. You have to really provide very strong arguments, logical analysis and so on. Then only it will be effective, otherwise because if you give a weak argument, they will simply brush it aside. So, intelligence of the audience also determines whether they will be able to what extent you will be able to persuade them. Self-esteem of the audience. Self-esteem means what extent, what is the attitude about themselves, the positive attitude leads to higher self esteem. Self evaluation, is it a positive, or higher, in a positive sense, then it is high self esteem. Self esteem influences susceptibility of persuasion. People who have high self esteem, they are not less likely to be influenced by people. People who has low self esteem, they become vulnerable. For everything, they will become afraid and so on. So, self esteem influences emotions and so on. So, low self esteem, they can be easily persuaded, because they are more vulnerable, they are not very clear. Whatever somebody says, they may just take it. Very high self esteem, they are very resistant. Okay, you cannot, it is not easy to change them, because they are not influenced so easily. Moderate self esteem are actually often most persuadable, because you can kind of little bit effort, you can influence them and so on. So, self esteem can also influence. Now, prior attitudes of the audience, everybody may have already have some attitudes towards whatever you are saying. So, what is their already existing attitude, that will also influence. So, people are more likely to accept messages that are similar to their existing beliefs. If they already believe something and you are saying the same thing again, they are more likely to accept it, because they already believe it. You are only giving emphasis to it. Messages that strongly contradict existing attitudes are often rejected. So, if there is a message which contradicts their belief system, they may not accept it. So, it will take more time to change their attitudes. For example, a person who trusts traditional medicine may readily accept messages promoting herbal medicines or herbal remedies, because they already believe in those traditional things. If you say this herbal medicine is good, they are more likely to believe it, because they already have a positive attitude towards that. So, prior attitudes may also of the audience will also influence whether the persuasion is successful or not. So, VL model, if you see, has identified various factors which can influence perception. So, in that sense, this theory is very comprehensive in terms of identifying factors, but it cannot really explain how persuasion occurs. How? What is the mechanism, that is not explained here, or it is only talking about factors. So, there is another model that we will talk about, which is called elaboration likelihood model. This model provides more psychological processes through which persuasion happens. It is not talking about just factors. This theory explains when attitude change happens, when it does not, when persuasion happens, when it does not. So, it is more of an explanatory model. So, let us look into this model called elaborative likelihood model. So, it is one of the very influential persuasion model. It was developed by Petty and Cacioppo in 1980s. It explains how people process persuasive message and how this process leads to attitude change. So, it is more process oriented model. Now, this ELM model, in short ELM, the central idea is that people do not always process persuasive message in the same way. So, whenever somebody tries to change your attitude, people do not process the information all the time in the same way. So, there are differences involved in it, and that will determine whether the persuasion happens or not. So, the term elaboration refers to extent to which person carefully thinks about the argument, whether the person is actually carefully processing what you are saying, that is very important factor. So, according to this model, there are two main routes through which audience processing happens, mental processing happens related to the message. One is called central route, another is called peripheral route. Now, the route depends on two factors: motivation to think about the message, whether the person is actually motivated to hear your message, or whether they have ability to understand what you are saying. If they do not understand, how can they process what you are saying? So, this motivation and ability will determine whether somebody takes a central route or a peripheral route. Okay. So, let us look into this little bit more. So, this is what diagrammatically it shows. Now, there is a message given to you. Let us say you buy this product. Okay. This is a persuasive message. I am trying to change your attitude that this is a very good product, please buy it. So, this is a message given. I want to change your attitude because I want you to like my product and buy it. Now, it may go into two routes depending on the nature of the audience. First route is called the central route. So, this is central route. So, let us say message is very important, people have high processing ability. So, somebody whatever the product you are saying, the product is important for that person and the person wants to actually, because that is very relevant product, that person is interested in the product and the person has high capacity, he has done all the research and is thinking elaborately about the product. Okay. So, let us say the message is important for the audience and they have capacity to understand the details feature of this product. Okay. If this happens, then it will lead to something called central root. Person will carefully process the information of the message. Whatever you are saying, they will understand, they will process it carefully. And then attitude change depends on the strength of argument. Whether the person will buy your product will depends on how strong argument you are giving about this product, positive nature of the product. Attitude change will completely depend on that. Now, let us say another set of audience, for them message is not, this is not very important, the product may not be very relevant for me, I may not like to, not very interested, and they also do not know much about this product. Let us say car, they do not know much about this model of the car, what is the features and so on, and they are not personally maybe very interested in that brand and so on, whatever it is. So, let us say this is the situation for the audience, then it will lead to something called as a peripheral route. So, this is peripheral route. Now, in this case what is happen? Heuristic processing of information happens. People will take some rule of thumb, they will do some shortcut calculation and they will be influenced by that. Okay. In such cases, attitude change depends on the presence of persuasion cues which triggers heuristic processing. In that case, whether the person will buy the product or like the product will depends on, let us say, very peripheral things, not the argument of all the features and so on, maybe just the beauty of the product or something, some shortcut they will, factors can influence their decision. So, this is because this is peripheral, they are not really deeply processing. The product looks very good, very beautiful, but product may not be very efficient, but it is very beautiful. The people will get influenced by those things if they go through the peripheral route of the processing of information. So, central route happens when, occurs when people carefully evaluate the argument and evidence in persuasive message. This is mainly happens when high level of cognitive processing person does, carefully analyze the information, focus on quality of arguments, requires motivation and ability to think. Only in this case central processing happens. So, central route persuasion is likely when there is it is personally important, sufficient knowledge is there, time and cognitive ability is there to think about the information, only then central processing happens. For example, a voter carefully reads political manifesto and compares policies before deciding whom to vote and support. He will carefully analyze what this person has done, what is his history, how he is different from other candidates. He will do all the analysis and then decide whom to vote. Then the person is using central route. If someone says vote me, they will do all this analysis and then decide whether to vote or not. Outcome of central persuasion is generally attitude change resulting from central processing are usually very strong. If they change their attitude through central route, then it is very strong. They will not change their attitude simply next day or something like that. It will be more stable, it will be long lasting, it will be resistant to counter arguments because they have already done all the processing. So, if other people say something against it, they may not be influenced by it. They are more predictive of behavior. If you change your attitude based on central processing, then it is more likely to be translated into actions also. In the peripheral route occurs when we do not carefully analyze the message, instead just we see superficial characteristics. These are mental shortcuts for making quick judgments. So, common peripheral cues are like people decide when they go through peripheral routes are like attractiveness of the communicator. If somebody is very attractive, they will, if they say something, they will believe in it. Celebrity endorsements are generally influenced by people who do peripheral routes. They do not see what is the quality of the product, but they buy simply because some celebrity has endorsed it. Then it is peripheral route processing. Number of argument rather than quality of argument, they will focus on. Emotional appeal they will see, they will decide based on some emotional appeal. Some are advertised or use very emotional things and people get influenced and they will buy the products, but this is the advertisemental emotional aspect is leading them to decide, not the quality of the product itself. Popularity, You see many people are buying something, so I will also buy. So, they are not doing processing is so centrally. So, these are all peripheral processing symptoms. For example, buying a product because famous athlete like somebody like Virat Kohli or somebody, some film star is endorsing it. You are not buying by looking at the quality of the product or something, just see somebody endorse it and you like that person and you are also buying it. So, that will be an example of peripheral route of persuasion. Now, outcome of peripheral route of persuasion is generally is very weak. Person may actually change his attitude again very soon, because he has not done the proper processing of it. It can be very temporary, easily changed, less predictive of behavior. So, such change of attitude is also very unstable and very temporary also, because the person has not really gone deep into it. At the end, just look into, so whatever theories we looked at it, there can be some applications of these theories also. So, let us say we will focus on this persuasion, how it is applied in the real world context. All the theories that we discussed already, the applied part is included in the examples. Now, just to give you more examples, this whole social media is nowadays, if you look at it, lot of persuasion happens. People always trying to change others attitudes and beliefs and so on. Everybody is running behind changing others attitude and so on. Through news as fake news and messages and so on. How can we understand all this through these theories of persuasion? So, let us just briefly look into that. So, for example, internet and social media platform, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, everywhere created ways for communication and influencing other. Everybody is communicating and trying to influence other people. And because of the reach, we can connect to thousands and lakhs of people. So, that's the implication is huge. This technology allows immediate interaction, collaboration, rapid sharing of information, making them powerful tools of persuasion. It is a very powerful tool. You can change thousands of people's mind through this media. However, the internet has also challenges in its credibility of traditional expert sources. Now, the problem with a lot of these social media messages or communication is that the issue of credibility. Now, trust in traditional news media has declined to about 42% and continues to fall. People trust for a lot of these traditional news channels are actually decreasing. So, this is what survey shows, and people are trusting more into those social media messages and whatever is forwarded and so on. So, so the impact is increasing more. The persuasive capability of such messages in the social world media is becoming stronger and stronger. Research shows that user generated content is often perceived as just as credible as professional journalism. Now, that is the problematic part, is that whoever is just writing something, people are start also believing, but that person may not be an expert. So that can be a problematic part to a lot of this social media generated communication for persuasion that ever is happening. In addition, messages that appear popular or widely shared tend to be more persuasive. If you see some message has been shared multiple times and people are reading it again and again, you also get influenced by it, okay? Although it may not be credible at all. So, despite all these advantages of social media and reaching to large number of people, psychologists have raised serious concern about the accuracy and the quality of such online information, and we all know most of this information may not be credible and there are a lot of fake news and so on. One major issue is the spread of fake news, which refers to misleading or giving false information presented in a very legitimate ways. You are presenting it as if it is true, but this can be a fake news. So, a lot of this is happening in the social media. So, although fake news has existed for a long time, the internet is making it more large scale in terms of rapidly how it is spread to people, and it is reaching to large audience, potentially influencing people's beliefs and collective understanding of the events. So, that is going to have a huge impact. So, fake news can take different forms, including clickbait headlines, poorly researched misleading reports, deliberately fabricated stories designed to manipulate public opinions and so on. These are all people intentionally trying to change others' mind, and this may not be credible, lot of these things. Now, to reduce the influence of this fake news, researchers suggest you become little bit of more critical thinking, evaluate the message carefully before believing in something, especially in today's world. For example, some of these important steps include: evaluate the source and its purpose, read beyond the headlines, check the author's credibility, verify supporting sources and evidence, check the date of publication. Many times people, few years back something was there, they will just put it now and spread it as if this is happening now. So, many people do not see the date of publication and so on. Determine whether the content is satire or a joke, and you start believing this is something serious, but it may be a satire kind of writing. Reflect on personal biases, you may also have biases, the other person may have also biases, reflect on that. Consult experts whenever necessary to understand something if you are not understanding, Now, if you look into all these steps, how do you fit into those theories of persuasion? All these things fits into the theories that we discussed, especially the last theory that we discussed, elaborative likelihood model. How does it fit? Many of these steps requires careful cognitive processing, similar to the central root of persuasion that we discussed in the ELM model just now. So, that means to reduce the impact of all these sources of information that can influence people, you should go through the central route of processing as per the ELM model, then it will, all the biases will be reduced. Because many people rely instead on quick cues such as popularity or familiarity or fake news spreads easily and influence public opinion, because people go through the peripheral route of processing. That is why fake news spreads. People are not processing it properly, not logically doing analysis. Just because it is forwarded or everybody is talking about it or somebody popular send those messages, you start believing. So, what we are doing? People are using peripheral route for a lot of these messages, that is why fake news spreads. What is the solution? Go to the central route, then fake news and all the informations which are not credible cannot spread if you do the central route of processing. So, that is how this theory is connected to this social media and fake news spread and the solutions for it. So, these are some of the things about attitude and attitude change, persuasion. So, with this I stop here. We will talk about few more social psychology concepts in the upcoming lectures. Thank you.